Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Public Planning Committee meeting of March 25th. Teresa, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you. I would like to invite Councilman Lennox to join us because I just received a call from Councilman Stanford that he would be unable to attend. Mr. Lennox, kind enough to join us. And Teresa, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Ms. Becker?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Lennox?
Here.
Mr. Ames?
Here. Thank you. And are there any additions to the agenda, or will somebody be kind enough to make a motion to approve them?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. Would you call the roll on the agenda, please, Teresa?
Ms. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Mr. Ames?
Yes. And approval of minutes. Are there any comments, additions, deletions? If not, is there a motion to approve as presented?
I move to approve as presented.
Thank you very much.
Second.
And Teresa, would you call the roll on that, please?
Ms. Becker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Mr. Lennox?
Yes.
Mr. Ames?
Yes, appreciate that. And Teresa, do we have any citizen call-ins?
No, sir, we do not at this time.
All right, thank you. We have no unfinished business, but we do have one item of new business, and that has to do with the review of workforce housing covenants and agreements. Jamie, would you be so kind as to give us a presentation, please?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. As you'll recall, workforce housing has been in the pipeline for a while, and in November of 2020, Town Council approved land management ordinance amendments that did two things. It created the workforce housing program and the incentive for commercial conversion. And then in February 2021, we added the additional incentive of the density bonus incentive. And so we're here today because of the requirements of the workforce housing program. There are several requirements for anyone who wants to participate in the program. And two of those are to record restrictive covenants on the property that will have workforce housing and to execute an agreement with the town that will ensure their compliance with the provisions of the workforce housing program. So in order to prevent holding up applications and bringing forward each of those as an application comes in to Town Council to approve them, we have drafted a form document that will be filled in when an application comes in. And it's before you today for consideration for basically a blanket approval to allow the mayor and the town manager to execute those as the applications come in for workforce housing. And so how did we come up with these? Staff looked at what previous covenants the town has had on properties, what previous agreements the town has done, and kind of used that as a basic format to make sure that we had the nuts and bolts of the components in there. And then along with the research that we've done over the past several years to actually create the workforce housing program, those same people that we talked to about their programs had covenants and agreements in place as well. And so we looked at what they had in place and kind of picked and choose what we felt would suit the town and the requirements that we've put in place. And so that's how they were put together. So I'll go through each one to let you know what is in each one and why it's in there. So the covenants, those are going to be our legal document. They will be recorded with the property, and it ensures that anyone who pulls the deed for the property understands that this property is subject to the workforce housing program. It will have a termination of the 30 years, so it has a 30-year time period on it, and then it will automatically terminate those covenants once the 30-year period ends. It will also cover the occupancy requirements where they have to comply with the income standards, and they have to have it as their sole residence, and that there has to be a member of the household who is employed by a lawfully licensed business of Hilton Head. We will also have the provisions that if they're going to rent the units, that they cannot rent them for a period of less than 90 days. And then the last thing in the covenants is if it's going to have a homeowners association that will charge dues, that the workforce units will be charged a maximum of 75% of what a market rate unit will be charged for the homeowners association dues. So those are the requirements that are in for the covenants. Now, the agreements, you will see that there are two of them. And one is if they're going to do rental workforce housing, and one is if they're going to do owner-occupied workforce housing. They're basically identical with the exception of probably two small places where you'll see the income requirements for the area average median income, and then the resale versus rental rates. Those are the only two things that you'll see are different in those two documents. And so with this one, this is an agreement that they'll sign with the town, basically saying that they're going to tell us the total number of workforce housing units that's going to be in that development. They're going to identify the size and the type of units, whether it's a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, things of that nature, and that the requirements that the workforce units have to be integrated within the development. They have to be similar in design and material as the market rate units, that they have the 30-year term, and that they're required to fill out a certificate of eligibility for the households that basically says that they are compliant with the income, the employment, and the occupancy requirements. And then they'll comply with the rental rates and the rental agreements, and they'll comply with the resale or sale provisions if they're doing owner-occupied. And so all of this comes straight from the provisions of the land management ordinance into these two documents that will be executed when an application comes in for workforce housing. Was there any questions with that?
I'm sure there'll be questions. Yeah. Mr. Brown.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jamie. I've got a few questions. I guess the first one is more of an operational question, I guess, than anything else. As I can understand how we would implement this if a developer is looking to do a new project, but I'm curious to know how we are going to enforce it over time. And I guess where I'm going with this, there's always a fear that units can be converted to market rate, similar to what we've seen on Hilton Head thus far, where a lot of the early development, there was affordable housing coordinated, and over time they have been, transformed into something else. So, what is the game plan in terms of enforcement of what we have before us?
Okay. For owner-occupied, we're operating in the assumption when the owner qualifies, they'll move into the unit, and there will be no checkup on that owner until such time as they choose to sell the unit. If it's within the 30 years, then the owner is required to notify the town when they put that unit up for sale. So that's how we will track the for sale units and ensure that the new owner, when they propose to sell it, would comply with the income requirements. Now, for the rental units, the manager, property owner, or developer is going to be required to, with their business license renewal, submit an affidavit to us stating that all of their occupants of their unit still comply with the income, occupancy, and employment provisions of the workforce housing program.
Okay, so there won't be, I guess, an on-the-ground effort to assure that the affidavits are actually being upheld. We hadn't gotten to that point yet. what you're telling
Not
me?
at this point, since there's not anything in the pipeline. It is something that staff can take on that we will know when the year is coming up, and we could potentially send letters to the owners, making sure that they verify things. But when it comes to the ownership units, those are going to be a little bit harder.
Sure. And you mentioned pipeline. Is this, I guess, this exercise something that we're going to be tracking over a certain period of time so that, we have a good metric as to if it's working or not? One of the reasons why I'm interested in, these agreements is we're putting forth a lot of effort to solve our affordable housing crisis, but not knowing if, what we're changing in terms of policy is actually attracting developers or even biting away at the issue is still such a big unknown. So I'm just curious to know if there's any thoughts of how we're going to maintain our inventory.
Well, it's pretty standard for both of these to be required for affordable housing projects. It is something that we will track, that anytime an application comes in for workforce housing, staff will be involved, I will be involved, talking to those developers just to see if the process is working, if there is a hurdle that appears to be too large, if there is something that they would recommend that we change. That's definitely something that I foresee that we would like to see happening with workforce housing applications, just because it's an unknown if it's going to be successful with the way it is written at this point.
Okay, well, that's good that we're going to develop a way of tracking. I would just suggest that we also set a baseline, because we have units on Hilton Head currently that are affordable, but we have no way of tracking either them maintaining that status or converting to something else, right? So the inventory that you're speaking on, Jamie, in terms of tracking into the future, that's great, but we have to have something to compare it against. And I've yet to come up in my mind how we do that, but I'm just suggesting that to staff that it's really important as we press forward. And the only other question I had in regards to the agreements, I know we're talking about the 60 to 80% AMI. If a developer is choosing to service individuals below that mark, I'm just curious to know, would they also have to go through the process of performing yearly checks and affidavits and that sort of thing?
Currently, they would not be eligible to participate in the program because there are other federal and state programs that could potentially support those developments.
Okay. I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Ms. Becker?
So just picking up on that and wanting some clarification on a couple of things. This program, these covenants, this process is only for those situations where developers come in and asked for an increased density on his property, correct?
It would be either the density bonus or the commercial conversion where they would get the incentive of smaller units.
Okay, so only when someone comes in and they're developing their property under those two programs that there would be any sort of requirement attached to their business licenses or future resale.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And then the other question that I have is, I just want to make a comment about that. So in terms of, we keep talking about workforce housing and the need for it, and it was brought up that we currently do have affordable housing on the island, not a sufficient amount, but we do have some. And so in terms of our inventory of overall affordable housing locations, we don't track that in any way, correct?
No, ma'am.
And they have the freedom to choose to continue to provide something of an affordable price for their renters, or they can choose to change their dynamic altogether and choose market rate, or to choose a different. Okay, just making sure that was true. And then the other question that I have, and I have others, but then the other question that I've had along the way is when that documentation with regard to income, that 60 to 80, or I think it's in homeowners, right? Aw. So I'll wait for Jamie to come back because I understand that one altogether.
Sorry about that.
No problem for me. So in terms of the documentation that's provided by a property owner, or with regard to those who are renting under this program, that is their affidavit is the only thing that the town maintains, right? We don't have a box of files with each individual person that is underneath what the owner is certified. We just keep their certification, say your business license is attached to you being an honest person, and this is what you've got. You maintain the files, and check in with us again next year, let us know what's changed, an update, etc. But we don't, as a town, maintain any of those individuals' files.
No, ma'am,
Perfect. Those are my two big questions right now. Thank you, JV.
Thank you, Tammy. Mr. Lennox, do you have questions?
Thank you, Dave. Most of what I was curious about has been answered. But Jamie, is it your intent to have the town manage the eligibility process, or are you going to third party that?
At this point, it will be a town process. Until such. I apologize. They delivered a package, so my dog is going nuts. At this time, it is proposed for staff to take that on. It could be that the Housing Trust Fund would take that on if we go down that road. And we've also talked to the Beaufort Housing Authority about the possibility of utilizing them in the future, depending on how big the program becomes.
And in the eligibility process on an annual basis, is there any confirmation of income such that the property owner or the renter stays within that 60 to 100% of AMI?
When they're coming in with the business license, they will be giving us the affidavit that they have checked that their renters are still within compliance with the income and eligibility requirements, and that's what the affidavit is for, is stating that all of that they've done, that they've checked with all of their occupants to make sure they still comply with the program.
And when that occurs, we simply take them at their word when they sign the affidavit?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Exhibit A, the warning that goes onto the deed. This property is subject to the declaration of covenants, restrictions, and limitations. Have we had the opportunity to talk with any realtors about what that means vis-a-vis the value of the property?
We have not at this point.
That would be an interesting question to ask Gene Beck at the Realtors Association or any owner developer that's coming in, because they should be able to tell us what this requirement is going to do to the property value. The deeper that we get into the 30-year term, the less impact it's going to have. But I would imagine it would have a retarding or detrimental impact to property values going in. Even that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Tom. Jamie, you've been working hard on this one for a long time, and I appreciate that. It's my understanding that what will happen if PPC were to approve this is that then would go to council for a council approval. Is that the next step?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I have several thoughts. As I read the documents, it seemed to me that there was some confusion or inconsistency around the AMI percentages. Did I just misread that and need to read it more carefully?
Probably. There, in the agreement, there is a definition of workforce housing that says 60 to 100%. In the covenants, it will say 60 to 80% if you're renting, and then 80 to 100 if it's owner occupied. Same with the agreements. You'll see 60 to 80 in the rental agreement, and then 80 to 100 in the owner occupied.
Okay, thank you. Several years ago, the town entered into a covenant with a affordable housing, workforce housing project that then later on, due to the pressure of owners of those properties, I believe they were single family sales. Under the pressure of those owners, the town council vacated the covenants. Do I have that right?
We had a moderate income housing program that went forward and gave bonus densities, and that was rescinded as part of the LMO, so those units were allowed to be sold at market rate.
Okay, so is there anything in these documents that make that more difficult or impossible? Obviously, the whole purpose here is to provide some segment of the workforce need, affordable housing need on the island, some comfort that this is going to survive for a period of time, let's say 30 years. So is there anything in this covenant that would prevent that from happening in the future?
With the 30-year provision on there, as well as the enforcement provisions in there, the town does have legal recourse against a property owner if they fail to comply with the workforce housing program.
But can the town void the covenants?
There is a termination on there. Let's see what it says. Yep, that's the agreement. Basic severability is only held to be invalid if there's something illegal or something to be found.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give that some more thought.
Okay.
In the agreement, there is the term household.
Yes.
Is that defined elsewhere in the document, or is there in your definition, does household refer to related adults or any number of people who want to be within that house?
The definition of household was created when we created the workforce housing program, and it does not refer to anything dealing with relation. It believes that it refers to people occupying the unit.
Okay, thank you. And if there are 4 people living in a unit and each one is making 80% of the AMI, is that a different circumstance or situation where a husband and wife who are maybe only have 1.5 incomes? How is that dealt with?
AMI is based on the occupancy, whether it's 4 adults or 2 adults and 2 children. So the total income of that household is taken into consideration, and then it's determined whether they meet the AMI.
So just using rough math, very brutally, so if 4 people are earning 80%, in theory, they could be earning substantially more than what that unit would qualify for as affordable housing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much. I agree with what Councilman Brown suggested about a baseline. I think it's very important for the town to be constantly aware at the level of housing that would be considered affordable for our workforce or for our community. So I would be encouraging staff to think of a way to do that and establish that baseline inventory limit. One last question. I know you've been working hard on this. Have Diane Bush or Curtis Coltrane, staff attorney and town attorney, reviewed this document and approved the language that you've prepared?
Yes, Diane Bush and I have reviewed the document, and she provided some comments, and I made some changes, and she has re-reviewed it, and it's my understanding that she is comfortable with it. And it has been sent to Curtis Coltrane, but just as of yesterday, so we have not received a response from him.
Okay. Diane, I see you jumped up. Appreciate your
Yes,
help
sir.
on that. Do you want to make any comments, or not necessary unless you want to add something?
No, sir. Jamie just set out the facts perfectly.
Okay, good. Thank you. I would make a general statement, and that is anytime there is an LMO amendment or some document that really represents a legally binding commitment, I would ask that the town staff attorney, and to the extent that it's possible for Curtis Coltrane, to review that so council has their approval at the point that we're discussing it.
Fair enough.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in and put a couple of questions that?
Of course, please.
So you brought up something that I thought was interesting. So two situations come to mind. One that was described, the household being whomever is living with underneath that particular roof. And if there are 4 adults there, each making 80%, 60%, whatever it is, up to the 80% AMI, and they're combined, is it just the person on the lease that is subject to the qualification? Or is it, as you said, and I remember you did say it, so I'm just pulling back a little, the combined annual income, which would make 4 people at that 80 or below level who together make more ineligible?
Yes, it is based on the household income. So all income is put together to see, and then based on the number of people in the house, they have that magic number of 4 people is $80,000, and if you make more than that, then you don't qualify.
Okay, and so then the question I would have is, how is that tracked? How is it that someone, and everyone knows I'm not a real fan of tracking anybody, but in this case, how is it, perhaps this scenario, one person rents the affordable housing unit, qualifies on their own, but then sublets or allows it, what's that mechanism that tracks that number? If that were to happen, which kind of comes under the radar. Does that make sense? Did I word that properly?
Yes, that is one of the occupancy requirements. If you are renting the unit or if you own the unit, you have to occupy the unit. You cannot sublet it.
So, but if you're the person on the lease and you bring in 2 or 3 of your friends to, sleep on the sofa, take up an extra bedroom, whatever the case may be, help you out, helping them out, how is that looked at?
It's the same as if someone were to change a job and somehow has a higher income. If they're currently in a year lease, that year lease can run its course. But when they renew, the owner is obligated to check with them to make sure, okay, how many people are in the household, verify the income again, and if they don't qualify, then they're given a certain period of time where they will have to leave that unit.
Okay, so we're counting on, so from point A, initial signing of a lease, verification, we're counting on no status change within that household that gets picked up. And if one would happen, a change would happen, a status would change, that doesn't get re-verified until the following year. So that's not really it's a whole lot of questions in there, frankly, and I'm not sure that we're actually prepared at this point to delve into that. But I do think that's one of the things that raises a little bit of a red flag for me. Then the other piece of it is, in terms of a purchase, is there any, so for 30 years, if I were to buy something, I fall into the category and I buy something, and for 30 years, I sell it to somebody, somebody sells it to sell, they can only sell it to someone who's making up to 100% of the AMI.
Ma'am.
Is there any room built into this for equity to be built for each individual property owner for them to make money on the sale? So the sale price itself isn't necessarily tied into this in any way. It's just that the person who's purchasing has to fall into that category.
It is in that whatever the person purchased it for, there are certain provisions that allows an inflation rate. If you do improvements to the house, you can get a percentage of that. So there are specific things that were written into the workforce housing program that allows them to gain equity in the home to charge a higher price than what they had originally purchased it for.
So am I forgetting, was that in the original program that we adopted? And so I need to go back and review that because that doesn't come to mind. Okay, thank you.
Good. So what is before us is, oh, Alex, please.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I just want to say this while it's fresh in my mind. Councilwoman Becca is definitely going in the direction that I was, I guess, just kind of poking at earlier, right? And this may not be germane to our vote today, but I know that we have affordable housing workshop scheduled the end of April, I think the April 28th. And I'm assuming, Jamie, that you will be a part of that discussion since you have worked so hard on this particular item. The sake of repeating myself, yes, I think that baseline is definitely important. At the workshop, I would, for one, at least like to just hear some ideas of how we can accomplish that. Not that I'm looking for that inventory to be in place by then, by any means, but just some ideas of how we get there. And I think it's important, although we've defined affordable housing with 60% and above, that we also include, households below, so we know exactly what we have here on Hilton Head. And the other point is really going to the enforcement of this. We've stood up and said that affordable housing is something that is very important here at the town of Hilton Head. And just that we've said other items are important, they tend to become a part of our budget to some degree when they are of significance. So the enforcement piece, I think if it's going to cost us a little bit more money to make sure that we're maintaining the level of service in terms of increasing our affordable housing units on Hilton Head, then I think we have to go in that direction, because there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen under the radar. Unfortunately, developers and landlords, the almighty dollar is the motivator, not maintaining a certain amount of affordable units on Hilton Head is not the motivator. So while I can appreciate the covenants and agreements that we're working very hard on, unless there's a strong enforcement behind it, I think we run the same risk that Councilman Ames mentioned earlier of conversion under the radar, so to speak. So I just strongly encourage that be a part of our discussion when we have our workshop also, so that we can help support this in a way that we have success versus just words on paper. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Tom Lennox, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
The management of the eligibility process, and that was the purpose of my first question earlier. It all depends upon how much activity we have under this program. It could quickly grow, and we would hope it would grow to the point where it may be unmanageable at the staff level, and we have to go to the Regional Housing Trust Fund or the Beaufort County Housing Authority, which is what they do all day long. So I think we're aware that there may be some holes in the process early on, and we have to take the good faith of the landlords and the property owners, and for that matter, the tenants. I mean, if the landlord comes and asks me how many people are living in this unit and what is their income, I wonder how quickly we start to hit some privacy issues. And I would defer to Diane and to Curtis on that. But we only hope that this becomes a management issue by virtue of this program being very, very successful and active.
Thank you, Tom. Jamie, one other specific question. You mentioned that this program is not for people who might be earning less than the 60%, but are they disqualified? I mean, if two of them come together and their combined income is more than 60%, they could live there, couldn't they?
Absolutely. If the household meets the 60 to 80%, then absolutely they could.
I would encourage you to think about the questions that we've asked today, and when you make your briefing before council, to try to touch on some of these things in advance of the questions. That way, I think we can move through the discussion at council more rapidly. Appreciate that. If there are no other questions or desire for illumination, is there a motion to approve the language as submitted for board discussion at the appropriate town council meeting?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. Is there a second?
I'll second that. This with a question now that this will come up first in that workshop that we're having, and then at a full council meeting for a vote, I would imagine.
If it stayed on course, it would go to the April 20th town council meeting.
Prior to.
Right.
Well, if I can jump in here, originally staff did not make a recommendation to you today. We thought it would take more than one meeting worth of discussion. And so we were just introducing it today because originally the workforce housing workshop was going to be yesterday, and we replaced it with the Gateway Corridor and moved workforce housing later. So we thought we were going to be coming back to you again before you were ready to make a motion. So if you want to go on and make it today, then there would be a brief at the April 6th meeting and then action at the April 20th based on, pending the mayor's approval of the agenda. But if you want to wait and take action at your April meeting, it would be after that workshop. And then we would be bringing it forward to town council in May.
Jamie, is it likely that you will have more answers at the workshop where we would benefit by waiting?
We will definitely have more information to share with you at the workshop. But wouldn't this come before PPC before the workshop, Jennifer?
What's the day of the next PPC meeting?
Not sure. Let's see. April 22nd? No, wait, April 29th. That would be the day after.
I'm just wondering what the benefit is in delaying.
It is the 22nd.
Okay.
Yep. So your workshop is after the next PPC meeting.
Yes, Alex.
I guess I'm getting a little confused, Mr. Chairman. I don't recall unless Jamie has something in her notes that is relevant to the agreements and covenants, outstanding concerns or questions that have come from the council at this point. Do you have anything in your notes, Jamie, that you would need to revise these documents?
No. I mean, it's more what we would do with enforcement. The enforcement provisions are in there allowing us to do it, but then, okay, what do we do? That's something that would be on a more of a policy decision that would not impact the actual covenants and agreements.
Sure.
Pam, are you willing to make a second to Alex's motion to move this forward?
So I think that the idea that the covenants and the language there is fine. We can either discuss it as a council or whether or not it's wise to have it as the broader conversation that we're having later in April But I'll make the second. I guess it can be decided at council whether or not we want to wait and have a broader discussion, and it can be
All right, okay.
rejected then.
Yeah, I'll talk to the mayor about that and leave it up to him. Okay. All right. Teresa, would you call the roll on that motion, please?
Yes, sir. Ms. Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Support.
Mr. Lennox,
Yes.
Mr. Ames.
Yes. Thank you. That passes unanimously. I appreciate that. I do know that Councilman Brown had a question that he wanted to address, or a couple of questions he wanted to address to Jennifer. I had a comment that I wanted to make, and I would ask other members, Tamara and Tom, if they have anything they want to add to the conversation. Basically, sort of touching on issues that the Public Planning Committee ought to be thinking about in the future, and consequently issues for council to consider. So Alex, would you go ahead and ask your questions of Jennifer?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions, Jennifer. Just by way of process on the first one, PPC, and this was reflected in our minutes that we approved today, voted in favor of moving forward the family compound and family subdivision of the overlay district. I was under the impression that the next stop would be town council. Can you kind of step us through where we're going with that?
Yes, sir. You're absolutely right. The next step is town council. So those amendments are scheduled for first reading on April 6th. Because what you all took action on is different than what Planning Commission took action on, we're required to go back to Planning Commission for them to have the opportunity to comment. So we would do that at their April 21st meeting. Then we will be back to Town Council for second reading on May 4th. That process is the same as we did for workforce housing, where they brought forward an entire package and you all originally just moved forward the bonus density. And so because it was different, we have to go back per state code and then come back to town council.
And for everyone's benefit, that difference is the definition of ownership. Is that the difference that we're talking about?
Well, that's a difference, but also what Planning Commission forwarded included increase in density, and some other provisions that weren't part of what, or were more extensive than family compound and family subdivision.
So that I'm clear, so the overlay district amendments came through as a package, so to speak, and we at PPC decided to pull out of that package the family compound and family subdivision. So at this point, it's no longer a package. That's the change? Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, I would just say it's still a package, but you all are only at this time advancing a portion of what Planning Commission sent forward.
I guess where I'm going is, will Planning Commission then be reading all of the items again, or only the family subdivision and family compound?
Planning Commission will just be told that they made their motion last fall, sent it to Public Planning Committee. The Public Planning Committee made a motion to advance family compound and family subdivision with the changes in ownership, and that's the recommendation to Town Council. They don't typically go back and rehash everything. It's a procedural component to go back to that recommending body per state code. And like I said, it's the same thing we did. It's non-binding on Town Council. It doesn't go back to Public Planning Committee then. It just comes straight to Town Council for second reading. But it's a procedure. It's a step we have to go through when the recommendation is different out of Public Planning Committee than Planning Commission.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. That explains it.
You're welcome.
Okay. The second one, you made a a presentation at our last town council meeting regarding the Gullah Geechee Task Force recommendations, and that there was going to be an attempt to bring forth more of the recommendations, possibly within this calendar year, and that you would be working on a very detailed work plan as to how we get there. I'm just curious to know when that work plan will be available for us to review.
What the step is right now is that we had a framework that town council approved in November of 2019 that we've been executing against.
Mm-hmm.
We have updated that with just the progress, the percent complete, some of the status of what's going on. We plan to review that with the task force at their next meeting, which is April 5th. And after we've had a chance to review it with them, if it pleases the committee, we can bring it forward to PPC to give you an update as well as on where the status of items are.
And I guess not to dive too deep here, Jennifer, but I'm just curious to know if the new document is going to reflect, I guess, a deeper detail in terms of how we get there. And I guess I'll tell you where I'm going with that. We all know that the items that have been recommended by town council originally, to some degree, are way out of our wheelhouse. There's still a whole lot of questions behind them, and that sort of thing. So I guess what I'm envisioning as far as a work plan is concerned, to help the policymakers and also the community, is a certain level of detail that includes how we're getting to the point of making a decision, okay? And I'll go back to case studies. I know I've said that over and over again, but I think the reality of the on-the-ground situation is so critical to us understanding why we're going in this direction, okay? So to whatever degree we can pencil that out in this work plan, I think will make us successful, or even more successful at the end of the day.
Thank you, Alex.
If
Thank
I can just ask a question for clarification.
Okay.
Understand when you're saying more detail in the framework so we know how we make the decisions, how we know we're done, how we know what we're doing next. How are you, when you reference case studies, are you saying to use the case studies to say, based on these 5 people that have come in to work with us, this one should move forward faster, or this is how we're going to make that decision because of what's been happening? How are you asking to link the case study into the framework?
Alex, let me make this suggestion. Why don't you talk to Jennifer offline, work through
Perfect.
this issue? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Tammy, do you
That's
have
perfect.
anything
Thank
you'd
you.
like to add based on what's on your mind these days, the corridor, anything else that comes?
Sure. 2 things. And first, I just want to follow up on that conversation that I was just listening to. I'm becoming increasingly uncomfortable with something that's happening. Our form of government requires that we as a council communicate with our town manager, and he directs the staff. And it seems to me that over the course of recent time, that there's more direction coming directly from council to staff, putting, I think, everyone in an awkward position. And so I would just like to have some clarification on that, perhaps maybe even from Diane Bush or from the town manager, in terms of how he'd like us to interact. So having said that, I'm going to make my comments in terms of what's on my mind, that PPC would have interest in possibly pursuing on a policy level. And that has to do with capacity on the island. We started a conversation, I think, yesterday during our 278 conversation. Actually, it wasn't the start, but a continuation of conversation that we've had sporadically since I've been on council. I think there's a time to really get a strong take a strong look and think about what it is that we envision Hilton Head Island to look like in the coming years. And a lot of that, in my mind, is driven by what is the capacity that the island can truly maintain while maintaining a quality of life for the residents and a quality of experience for the visitors that, as many of us enjoyed, pushed us to becoming the residents that we are now. And so I think focusing on capacity, focusing on our infrastructure, how we maintain our quality of life here is critical at this point. I think a focus on how we're developing, how we're looking at developing in the future, what our LMO allows and what's desirable is a conversation that I know we agree on. And I heard Mayor also yesterday agreeing that that should be a next stopping point for this group in terms of policy matters. So that is all I have to say at this moment. Thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate that. Tom, would you like to add any of your thoughts?
Sure, David. Thank you. Tammy, you bring up a good point because it would be very easy for us as a council to initiate policy that is counterintuitive. We want workforce housing on the island, bringing more people on the island, but yet we want to manage the growth. So those two policies are perhaps conflicting with one another. So I think your point is very well taken. David, yeah, I think we're going to see the work for the Regional Housing Trust Fund consultant start to heat up now. That agreement has been executed by Beaufort County, and all of that work will funnel back through SoLoco. With your concurrence, I think bringing that work ongoing as it progresses back through Public Planning Committee makes a lot of sense.
Excellent. Great, Tom. I appreciate that. I'm going to make a couple of comments, but let me just sort of position this last few minutes. I think it's important for us in this committee to share what's on our minds so that the public has an idea of where we as leaders are coming from. And so perhaps it's not the most efficient way to run a meeting, but I think it does give the public insight that it might not otherwise get. So I'm just using that prerogative to seek out what's on your mind at these meetings. Tammy hit on something that I'd like to sort of piggyback on, but in a slightly different way. This comes out of our conversations yesterday at the Gateway workshop. We talked about the balance between the resident and business wants and needs, and then the capacity of the island's limited infrastructure. There's a trend that raises real concerns in my mind, and it has to do with single-family residential neighborhoods like North Forest Beach, Folly Field, Bradley Circle, neighborhoods within Sea Pine, Shipyard, Palmetto Dunes, are being transformed from residential districts to commercial districts of mini motels and short-term rental properties. Many of these structures, and it's mind-boggling, candidly, many of these structures are 3 to 4 times the size of the house that they're replacing. And rather than just a family unit of 3, 4, 5, these places are being advertised to accommodate 16 to 24 people. I think this trend radically changes the atmosphere of the neighborhood, the sense of security, the friendship, the camaraderie, whatever you want to call it. It definitely loses vegetation and separation between units in exchange for concrete driveways and building mass. It significantly increases the burden on island infrastructure, facilities, and services, all of which threaten the island's quality of life and reputation. It physically removes affordable housing for workers while at the same time increases the cost of real estate, making it that much more difficult for people to afford to live on the island. I think it's a trend, no, I believe it is a trend that is accelerating out of control because the digital world makes absentee ownership and renting so easy. And absentee owners are most often focused on returns on investment rather than our island's community values, history, and natural environment. The trend is out of control, and if allowed to continue, will destroy the character of this community from the inside out, like a tapeworm. Hilton Head is a community of people, not an investment vehicle, and I think we as a council should do something about that trend. Thank you. If there
I
is
just
no
want to
more,
second that was well said, and it incorporates everything that we've spoken about broadly. It speaks to everything that I've been concerned about since this issue, and since even becoming part of the community here on Hilton Head Island as a permanent resident. It's impacted us personally. I have empathy for all of those who are experiencing it, and I'm 100% on board with that, David, and I hope that we can quickly have those discussions and look for solutions for everyone. Thank you.
I have spoken to the town manager about this issue. He has spoken to Diane Bush about it, and I think he also recognizes it as a threat to the character and reputation of the community. So moving forward. If there is no more business to come before the committee, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
There's a second.
Second.
All those in favor just simply signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned, and thank you very much for your work, and also to Jamie and Jennifer and Diane.